Okay, welcome everybody, and a big welcome to Donna Corley. We are very grateful that you are sharing with us today the membership of Athena's Council so that we can learn from your experience in your career. Donna is going to share with us what she wishes she knew earlier in her career. So, welcome, Donna.
Thank you. Thank you, Molly. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for all you're doing with this council. I think it's phenomenal, and I wish it was here 30 years ago when I was starting out, which was kind of at the heart of what I wanted to talk about today. And just to give everyone background, I started at
Donna,
Freddie. Yep.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, but can you turn your camera
Hmm.
just a little bit so that you're in the center of the
Okay. How about that? Is that better?
perfect,
Okay.
perfect. Okay, go ahead.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Yeah. So I started at Freddie Mac literally 16 hours after graduating from college. So I was as green as can be. And I started in what they had their own internal broker dealer. So it was a little Wall Street firm at the company. And so you think how male dominated mortgages are, you think how dominated the Wall Street world is, put those together, and this 21-year-old stood out like a very big sore thumb. And so it was truly trial and error and learning my way around. And so not having a council like this or a group of women that had roles that I could see in different positions say, oh, I can talk to them and learn from them. So probably the good first 10 to 15 years of my life, I felt like I was on my own. And so luckily that didn't stay that way. But so then obviously worked my way up through Freddie Mac. And so by the time I left at the end of 2022, I was running the single family business. So went from, again, the most junior analyst you could be, up to running the industry. So what's the secret to the success? I would say what I wish I knew, first and foremost. Maybe I'm going to break it down into five things, but obviously we'll go wherever you guys want to go with questions and topics. So please feel free to steer it. But the first is saying you define success. You define what success looks like for you, and you decide what it looks like for that very specific period of time. And what took me a while to realize that, wait a minute, my definition of success when I was 21, well, I could change that when I was 25 and when I was 30 and when I was 32. And it really was, I also like the saying, your career is a marathon, it's not a sprint. The first 10 years of my career was a full all out sprint. And that worked up until I had kids. And then all of a sudden, I remember coming back from maternity leave and I'm like, whoa, I'm not running as fast as I used to at work. I'm feeling, the guilt factor from home. I'm like, I'm failing on both ends and you're feeling horrible. And then I started realizing, oh, wait a minute. I'm holding myself to the same measures as before and that same definition of success. And that's not fair. That's not my definition anymore. It's changed. And so it was time to evolve that. And what I realized is that all the different points in my career, when I got to this point of frustration or not being enough or not doing the right thing or whatever, it was because my definition of success had to be adjusted. And sometimes it meant I had a way more priority for home. Other times it was more for work. But it was just a matter of taking the time to self-reflect and saying, all right, what do I need here and now? And then I could be all in. And so the distraction of not feeling like you're doing enough and is actually a bigger detriment. And so it makes you even, it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. You're doing even worse than you probably even thought you were. So or you've said that differently. You're never doing as bad as you thought you were, but it gets worse if as more you keep thinking that you are. Um, so that's the one thing. Again, define success for you. Don't compare yourself to other people. You're going to do things differently, and that's okay. And do what's true to you and what's going to be making you happy and feeling fulfilled inside. Um, My other piece of advice, and it's kind of similar on that vein, is you have to say no to make room for yes. And back when I was running that sprint for the first 10 years, I was probably just taking on every single project or every single thing that came my way. And finally, it got to a point where it's like, whew, all right, I can't put something else on my plate. There's a saying, if you want to get something done, give it to a busy woman. Well, there's a reason for that. We always seem to get it done. But at some point, you have to make sure you're prioritizing your own self-care, that you're having boundaries. Um, you know, I took a new job. This is when I just taken over as the chief risk officer for the single family business. And in addition to that, I was in charge of the entire company's their rising leader group that they had for all the millennials and whatnot as a counselor. So I took that on as the executive sponsor, and then my boss in a big group setting asked if I would take on like an employee engagement effort for the department. And I remember thinking, all right, this is something that I normally would love to do, but I'm like, at this point, I'm like, my plate's full. Like I can't do it. And so in that setting, I'm like, all right, given I'm 2 months into my new job and I'm doing this and I'm doing this, I'm like, do you think maybe you could pick someone else this year, and a year or two from now when you're picking someone else, you can come back to me? And he's like, oh, of course. And so went on to somebody else. Now, I'll admit, I didn't really think about it that much until a bunch of us had like a happy hour that night. And I had 4 women come up to me and thank me for, in that public setting, saying no in a very respectful way, but just to set those boundaries. And she's like, we don't see that enough. And so to make them realize that's allowed and you can do it and it's okay. It was a great outcome for all of us. So I didn't even realize that saying no helped them even more probably than it had helped me. So it worked. It was a win-win. Let's see. My third piece of advice would be, the fastest way up the ladder is not necessarily vertical. And so you have to be open for some strategic horizontal moves. When I would change, and granted, I was with the same company, but I think it was 13 different, maybe it's 15 different positions. It was 19 bosses and 14 different positions in those almost 30 years. So it wasn't like I was just in one role, right? And so as some of these changes ended up being horizontal, those were the ones that I hemmed and hawed over the most, and the sleepless nights, and should I do it and should I not? And in the end, those were the biggest career growers that set me up for the whole next level. And really what you need to be looking for is like, all right, what type of skill set is this going to expose you to that you don't have today? And how is that setting you up for your next ultimate goal? And I don't want people to hear into this that, well, maybe I'm not ready for that vertical step, so I'm going to go and take the safe route and do something else. That's not what I'm saying at all. And in fact, my tucked into this advice is raise your hand even before you think you're ready, because odds are you're ready and you just don't see it in yourself. But that said, don't be afraid to take on some of those horizontal challenges. That makes you a very well-rounded leader, and so then someone that will be tapped for bigger and bigger roles going forward. So on that vein too is building a network. So my fourth piece of advice is you need to have an incredibly strong group around you. You need someone who's going to advocate for you when you're in the room, when you're not in the room, which is probably even more important. But your career is built on the strength of those that you surround yourself by. And even at this point, I still feel it's who I know and who I'm connected with that has influenced my career even more so than what I know. It was probably about the last 10 years or so that really switched. So early on, I had one boss who was a complete rock star. And as he kept taking on different roles in the company and getting more and more responsibility, he kept giving me more and more and more. So, hey, this was fantastic. I like this. And so didn't really lift my head up to think twice about it until all of a sudden he announced he was leaving the company. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God, like he had been my one sponsor this entire time. And so now all of a sudden I'm like, all right, well, like in a trading room setting, you don't even leave to go grab lunch. Like once they bring lunch up, so you don't have to leave your desk. So there's been no networking other than the people that can see you on the trading desk. And so I'm like, all right, this is now a problem. And so all the things that I used to rely on him and the connections that he had, all of a sudden I felt, I had realized I did myself a huge disservice. And so once the panic went away, it was reaching out strategically to the people that I know that he had a great relationship with and just said, hey, he's leaving us. Can we get together for coffee, for lunch, or whatever, and talk and make sure that we don't drop anything. And I'll say, even though most of them were his peers, so I was the more junior person, all of them said to me, like, so appreciative that I reached out, that they needed it just as much as I did, and actually felt a little guilty that they hadn't been the one to initiate the whole thing. So anyway, so don't worry that it's never too late to start networking and to start those connections. So it did work out well. But I'll also say is I'm an introvert. So that when I hear the word networking, I have these horrible images of these cocktail parties with 300 people and small talk galore, and I'm like, oh, and I just get drained just thinking about it. So that's not the type of networking I personally do, because I don't feel like I get out of it. In fact, I feel like that drains me rather than gets me any value add. And so, but know yourself, be true to yourself, and structure it however you want. I ended up then just being very thoughtful on who I reached out to. Again, made it more one-on-ones where I was meeting over coffee, meeting over lunch. Usually there was something specific that I wanted to talk about early on. And then for most, I felt like you kind of just develop a friendship. So maybe the issue at hand we solved within a meeting or two or something, but we kept going once a quarter to get together, to stay in touch, just because we both were enjoying the conversation. And so don't shy away from those types of connections, because you never know the next time that they're going to have a job opening, or they may leave, or something may happen, and then they may want to tap you to come to their new company, or who knows what could happen. So and I will say, being on the board now with PennyMac was because the CEO and chair of their board, David Spector, I had literally been trading with him for 25 years before joining their board. So someone who I knew in an external network, not just internal. And I always say, well, after years of trading, and usually when you trade, he was trying to sell, I was trying to buy. Usually there's a lot of headbutting as you're negotiating. So I didn't completely offend him, but he also probably knows I wasn't a pushover to be able to be comfortable to have me to join him. But again, those make connections and make a network, both internal and external, because it'll keep impacting your career for years. And then my last piece of advice I'll say, and then again, we'll open it up and talk wherever you guys want to go. But it's to know when to ask for help. I remember early on, well, I was a complete perfectionist and, wanted to overanalyze everything and get every I dotted and T crossed. And at some point, it's good enough. And recognizing, when does it need to be A-level work, and when can it be B, and when is a C perfectly fine, and let's move on and get on to the next thing. So sometimes getting it done matters more than the absolute perfection. And so just know that situation. But more importantly, it's who can you rely on to help get something off to the finish line. And so with I had this one woman who worked for me. When I asked her to get something done, it's almost like she interpreted that to mean like only she can do this, and wouldn't use her network and rely on others and to help feed into the process. And that's obviously a huge miss, and that's something I held against her. So something she was doing because she thought I would want to see that she could do it all, instead was actually a big negative for me, to saying, no, you have all these people here who could make it so much easier. I don't want you to work harder. I want you to work smarter. And so again, part of building your network is to then say, all right, now I can help leverage and use and know when to ask. And so for that network to make it a group that is very diverse from your skill set. So that way, when you need to ask for help, saying, well, I need to think of some innovative ideas. All right, that's not my specialty, but you know what? That's this person's specialty. Or, I'm writing a memo on something that's more technical than I'm used to writing. This person may be able to help read on that, and I may be able to help them in a different way. And so it's kind of knowing what everyone's strengths are relative to your own, and plugging and playing, and then again, scratching their back when they need it as well. So it usually ends up being a great group, and it makes that network that much stronger. People usually appreciate when you're asking for help because they're feeling valued, and they're feeling that, hey, someone reflects, someone is recognizing my strengths, and it can be a great for everybody. So with that, I will pause and see what questions you guys
have. Okay, I'll start, Laura. You talked about like internal networking and external networking and being introverted.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have what are some other ways that you built up, these friendships? Was it always one-on-one, or how were you able to build that external network?
No, that's a great question. So no, it can't always be one-on-one, because that would also take forever. But I was very thoughtful in terms of groups that I would join, and networking in that area. So there are a couple like executive women's in the mortgage industry, different groups. Everything from MBA has their Empower, and then there's some others that are some smaller ones. So very thoughtful about, all right, how can I connect with them and leverage those infrastructures to be able to say, all right, how do I meet some of these other amazing women and get their ideas and what they've gone through. And I will say, even though the organizations I just talked about were for women in particular, it's also a disservice to say you're only going to network with women. So I want to make sure that, I don't, I want to make that clear, because it's unfortunate if there are a lot of men that are going to ultimately be making some of the promotion decisions, then you need to have men giving you advice on, how are you going to be, thought of or seen, or how maybe it's a sounding board if you need to take an important topic up the chain. And so, having a male perspective could be very important, not just a female one. But in addition to that, I think, so there's find some other groups that are helpful like that. What was the other thing? The other thing would be, it would just be following up. So it's kind of like when, even having a client meeting where, whatever, there's going to be 10 of you in the room or something like that. Odds are you've met somebody, even in that type of setting, that, hey, you had a great little side conversation before or after the meeting or something like that. It's using even just little emails to say, hey, I really enjoyed talking about XYZ or whatever. And so part of it is this, it doesn't have to be a whole separate meeting with that person, but it's keeping a relationship going that already leverages something that may be a connection that already happened. And then they'll think of you when there's another question that comes on their mind or whatnot. So
Okay, I have another one. Laura, do you have any questions?
Molly, I think I'm going to let you kind of run with this, but Donna,
Okay.
I really appreciate you sharing kind of your story. I think a lot of people need to hear how you had to work your way up. Because people today, there's a lot of men and women that think they can just walk in and got their college education, or they, their parents did something and they should be able to walk right in and have a position right away. So I think that is a key play, and just how humble you were going through that process and asking for some of that help and guidance. I think that's very, very huge in the industry, not just mortgage and not just real estate. Everyone needs mentors and everyone needs somebody to help them guide no matter what stage you're at.
Yep.
And I think a big piece that you bring to the table, I know Molly believes in this and does so much of it, is sharing that knowledge back, and not holding it in, not keeping it all to yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There is a lot of I know it all, but I can't share it all, right? In this, for whatever reason, it's so competitive that we see that a lot. And I know with the community banks, which is a company that a bank that I work with, it's very hard to get into approvals for that. Being a newer player in the market, newer being less than 20-year-old mortgage company, but
Yeah.
it was very hard to get in to the Fannies and Freddies and get those approvals. But boy, once you got them, it stood you up differently. And so I think and I know it's harder to get in and there's a lot more risk, but I think there's a reason that the Fannies and the Freddies of the world need to reach back out more to some of the other players that aren't. And I know you're on Penny Mac's board, and I know they do a lot of work with a lot of different banks and brokers and things. And I think there's a huge need out there. How do you see that changing, or how do you see? There's talk about being privatized, going back, to what it was before. That could be a journey, but how do you see that happening, and what would you suggest?
Oh, so I guess the question is being about the ending the GSE conservatorship. Is that in general? How do I see that playing out?
That's one of them.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'd say, well, the next couple of years will be very telling, because it needs to either happen quickly, or it's going to lose momentum. So I think it's really be on the lookout for, what things happen over the next couple of years. I also think it'll be interesting to watch who gets hired over at the Treasury, and is it folks that have had, or is it where their top priority would be a GSE exit. I would say no matter what happens, ultimately, if exit is an option, it would take quite some time to flush out potentially what that means and how that changes things. If done very smoothly, it in theory could be no operational disruption whatsoever. But then again, it also could be very bumpy, and I think people are going to be very careful of what that's going to ultimately mean for mortgage rates, and be very cautious about moving too quickly and having that type of effect. But at this point, I feel like there's so many, I guess, crazy things happening that are so severe versus what we're used to when there's a transition, that the crystal ball is not working. So anything that I would have said, past would have told me this, I don't think we can use that anymore. So we'll just all be watching anxiously, and it'll be interesting times. And I guess I'm glad I'm on the side watching, not in that front seat right now.
Do you see taking any kind of role in any of that with all your knowledge?
I think there's a lot of firms out there who are trying to help advise folks of what to do and how should they think about this or how should they think about that, I'd potentially talk to them about sharing my views if they wanted it. I'm not looking for a full-time gig,
Right.
but if someone wanted to meet for a couple hours to pick my brain on something, I'd be open to that type of stuff. But
there's a lot of picking to do up there, Donna. There's a lot of picking. You've built a fabulous career, and even though you have just focused in so diligently, folks can learn so much from you. And Molly, it's great that you opened this up and brought this to the table. I'm sure you've had questions brought into you too. I didn't want to sidetrack you, Donna, but
Excuse me.
no, it's good.
Okay, so this is the question that was sent to me for you, and I actually hear it often. Have you had I'm sure you have had a supervisor that just doesn't see you for what you like, doesn't appreciate what you bring to the table? How did you handle that successfully?
Yes. Yeah. I've said earlier, I had 19 different supervisors in my 27 years at Freddie. Some I loved, some not so much. And so I said I learned something from every single one of them. I learned what I wanted to emulate, and I learned these are things I will never do as a manager. And so it always kept shaping me and how I treated others and how I led. When I will say, I think one of the reasons why my career did advance as fast as it was because I was working for someone where that was not the issue. And they themselves were a rock star. They were confident in what they were doing. They wanted themselves surrounded by other rock stars who could help keep this going. And it was a fantastic team. And the dynamic where there's a leader who's not a good leader and someone who's not bringing out the best of folks, it's not an environment I could stay long, I'll admit. And so it was like, all right, where are the tea leaves on this? Are they going to be leaving or not? And so that would normally, when I'd be like, all right, I'm starting to tap my network to say, all right, I'm looking for something new. I need a new challenge. I need something different. I personally didn't want to be in a spot where I was going to feel, less than and being held down because if the manager wasn't willing to help raise the team. One of my first bosses had made a quote of, my job as your boss is to make it that you're my boss someday. So this is what happened when I was 22, right? And so his goal was to keep helping me grow. And so that's the mindset that luckily I had very early on. And that's what fed me and my leadership style and just gave me zero tolerance when I ran into managers that didn't have that. I will also say I wouldn't have taken a job if that was the type of dynamic either. I think more often or not, I was tapped to go into roles where I'd be replacing someone who had that mindset. So it's as you're taking a job, be very careful and do a lot of due diligence in terms of who that boss would be. Obviously, things change once you get a job. And so it's harder to navigate something that I guess happens to you after the fact. But then change your definition of success. And maybe success is, rather than getting them to see you, it's recognizing what do they think is important. Can you deliver on what they think is important? Because maybe they'll see you if you're delivering what they want rather than what you think you wanted. But if you can't be happy with that change, then all right, find another place where you can be you and deliver with what you want. So there's no right or wrong answer, but it's being self-aware and know that it's your decision to make.
Well, at the beginning, you were talking about, defining success for yourself.
Mhm.
So, in your career, as you think back of the achievements so far and the successes that you've had so far, what which ones are you most proud of?
I would say there's, I'd say two things. First, it was, well, soon after I took over running the single family business, put it in perspective, it was fall of 2019. And so next thing you know, we are hit with COVID. And having the team, I guess, virtually come together and literally rewrite every origination and servicing guideline that we have to be able to make it, acceptable to be able to happen at a distance, and to, work on coming up with the forbearance plans, and, getting adjustments of what you need for appraisals. Like, we've literally had to rethink the entire mortgage process from soup to nuts. And that, it was intense, it was stressful, it was a lot of work, but the team was phenomenal. And it was, I feel incredibly proud to say, in that environment, we then stood there ready to help in the biggest mortgage origination era in the history of the world. And so it was pretty remarkable to be able to have gone through that, and to lead the team through that was incredibly heartwarming. The other, I would say, there was a bit of a culture transformation that I had done a little bit earlier in my career. And, post the GSEs going into conservatorship, rightfully so, there had been a lot of credit policies that got ratcheted way back, and so then it became, the answer for everything was pretty much no. So once we got the tiny box, and there was no. And so when I came in, I'm like, all right, sometimes no is actually a riskier answer than yes, like this. And so then it became how can we be more creative? How can we be more proactive? How can we make sure that the risk organization has a seat at the table to help truly design things at their core that are smart, and not a stopgap that people feel like they just come to at the end to check a box. And I'm like, that doesn't do it for me. I'm like, I'm not a check the box type person. I'm like, no, we're a seat at the table. And so having that organization think of us, I said, I don't want us to be considered the brake in a car. We're the steering wheel. And so that was the image that I gave them all, and helping go through that culture transformation is probably another one of my proud successes in my career as well.
That is a huge difference in how, I mean, in how the culture would behave at every level, pretty much.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Mm-hmm. It's amazing how, I mean, culture, it's in every crevice, right? And so it's from the most important thing you're doing to the most mundane thing. And so you need the right one. And clients feel it. So I remember them saying, wow, like, interacting with us was just different no matter who they spoke to. It's like, all right, things are changing, things are different. And I'm like, that's truly what you want to hear.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I have one last question, and
Okay.
hopefully this is an easy one. Um, for women who aspire to know as much as you do about the markets and about what's happening, What are some news sources that you pay close attention to?
All right. So I'll give you a sneak behind the curtain, which is to say, saying no to make room for yes. So to make room for yes, I cheat and I actually have like all the headlines, like all the cliff notes sent to me. I know Freddie Mac had done that thing, had done that type of curating of all the different news outlets in the mortgage industry. Penny Mac does it as well. So I get to cheat and just read the synopsis. And then when something's interesting, I just click on it. So no rhyme
Okay,
or
so it's
reason.
like an index that you
Yes.
get.
Yeah.
Okay.
Here are all the major mortgage related news articles for the day. And so then I can pick and choose which one do I really want to open and spend my time reading. That said, my advice is don't limit yourself to mortgage news. So I also then read the Wall Street Journal and pretty much cover to cover, at least all the different headlines in it to figure out, I'm like, because sometimes it's like, all right, is some other industry doing something that's applicable here? That's where you're going to have, or is there a warning sign of something that's to come? And that's when you're going to really have some aha moments as well that are maybe even more groundbreaking than finding out about other stuff that's already hitting your industry. So don't lose sight of that as well.
Yeah, that's a good tip because that's a career changer right there. If you get an idea from.
Exactly. Yes. Yep. Yep. Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate this, Donna, and we're going to use the guidance that you have shared with us, and we're going to share it far and wide. And I really appreciate your generosity.
Awesome. Well, it was my honor to be here. And again, Molly, thank you so much for setting this up and all you're doing to help pay things forward. Because that to me is, the best. The best.
Thank you, Donna. It's surreal to me to be on a Google Meet with you after following, I fangirl a little too hard. It's a big day for me, so I really appreciate it.
Awesome. All right. Well, have a great one. Have a great rest of the week, and hopefully we'll talk again soon.
Yes, thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.